So my name is Dr. Jim Bixler, and I'm with Mayfield Counseling Centers, and we're here tonight where our CEO Mark is going to be doing a talk on how to redefine success for teenagers and how to kind of examine their social emotional wellness and what that is and what that means and what are some of the major issues that play into that in our society and our relationships and real broadly, just kind of talking about the mental health of teenagers.
Thanks for having me tonight. I love coming and talking about these things. I just wish it was under different circumstances, and one of my biggest passions is that we do this on a regular basis so we don't hop from crisis to crisis, but we continue this conversation. So I'm glad to see you here tonight, and we're just going to have a conversation. I'm going to spend about 30 minutes talking at you, and then you're going to be giving questions to us so we can be talking with you afterwards. So there are no questions that are off limits, and so I want you to feel free to put those out on the index card, and we'll get them. And if we can't get to all of them tonight, we'll try to collect them back and figure out a way to either put it out in an email or get those questions answered so you don't walk or leave here with a question that's hanging. So one of the things that I've been doing, so just a little bit about myself, I've been doing some form of working with youth for the last 20 years. And part of the reason I'm so passionate about this is that I myself am a suicide survivor. And I was 12 years old when I attempted to take my life due to abuse and bullying and different things that were going on in my life. And I didn't really have a whole lot of outlet of who to talk to and how to talk to these people about my problems. My parents were very active, but were missing things. And so a lot of my passion was driven from my own story. And if you want to hear more, I can tell you more about it later. But just a little bit about myself in that sense. I struggle with anxiety and depression to this day. Is kind of my story. It doesn't define me, but it's something that comes up and pops itself up on a regular basis that I have to make sure that I pay attention to and that I work through. And so a lot of my passion comes from that, but also just seeing this current state of our teenagers and trying to figure out what to do with this. Okay, I'm going to go grab it. I was joking that I'm Italian, so I have to use my hands a lot. My grandmother's from Sicily, and so I have to move around and walk. But I've noticed a lot over the last probably 10 years of doing this that we're getting an increase. And if we turn on the news, we turn on and listen to statistics and that kind of stuff, suicide across our country is on the rise. And so tonight, I'm not going to be talking about suicide specifically, because I think we as a community, as an El Paso County community, have done a pretty good job with the public health and with the signs of suicide and different things like that, really walking with our kids along this journey. But I want to talk about something a little more upstream tonight. And this idea of redefining success for our kids. And one of the things that I've noticed a lot, maybe you've noticed too, is that success, really the traditional definition of success is wealth, power, and position, right? If you turn on anything on MTV, VH1, you turn on the news, it's about money, it's about power, it's about position. But what if that could be different? And when we get our kids in school, we then translate that to a little bit differently, right? We look at grades. So if I get good grades, I'll get into a good college, I'll have a good job, and I'll make money. Or I will try to do the best at something so I can get a scholarship to go to a good school and to get a good job and have a good life. But is that all there is to it? And we look a lot at that's the end all be all. And we have this unspoken rule that good grades plus talent plus popularity equal plus whatever else you want to throw in there equals success. And I want to challenge us tonight with that thinking. Now here's the thing. You might be saying, okay, wait a second. The system that we live in, the education system, the bigger, broader education system, this is what we look at. We look at test scores, we look at these kinds of things. I get that. I get that we cannot change the system tonight. But what if we changed how we viewed it in our own households? What if we changed the way we looked at it as a community and monument? And maybe that trickled down then to El Paso County and into the state of Colorado. Studies show that it only takes about 800 to 1,000 people to change millions. And then I want you to think about that as you sit here tonight. There's probably about 250 people in here tonight. That's 1/4 of what it needs to change the course of how we look at our society. But in reality, it's this. And I want to pull out some statistics real quick because I was doing some research for this talk, and as I do research throughout my time talking throughout this community, we find that 1 in 5 college students struggle with anxiety or depression. 1 in 5. So extrapolate that to this crowd tonight. Look around. 1 in 5. I can't do math, so somebody do math for me. 250 divided by 5. Quick, somebody good? 50. So there are 50. Oh, that was easy. I feel stupid now. Okay, so 50 people in this room are going to struggle statistically with anxiety and depression. Think about that with our college students. And here's something that just blows my mind. 53.5% of students described feeling more than average or tremendous stress over the past 12 months. Here's one thing we don't talk about. Prolonged stress actually changes the structure of the brain to be viewed similarly to that of combat PTSD. I've got brain scans in my office, and if you actually were to take a brain scan of somebody with prolonged stress, now prolonged stress meaning over a period of time, right? And put it next to a brain of somebody that just got back from Iraq, you couldn't tell the difference. That's what prolonged stress does to our kids' brains. And so here's the causes of student anxiety today. The academic standards emphasized by test performance, concerns about future job prospects, financial pressure caused by student debt, and excessive involvement in the often stressful bully and abuse-enabling social media, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But if you think about it, this is just scratching the surface on some things that cause stress in our kids. And I want you to think about your own household. What is driving your relationship with your kid? What is driving your experience with them? Is it grade-oriented? Is it performance-oriented? Or is it relationship-oriented? And I'm not saying that expecting things from our kids is bad. I think it's a fantastic thing. But how do we do that is really the importance. Is it done in, if you don't do this, you're going to get in trouble, versus let's do this together alongside each other in relationship. And so, how should we then redefine success? If this is something that we've seen, the success-driven kids, and so one of the things that I'll put out there is that I've spoken all across the Front Range, all the way up to Montana and Wyoming, when school districts or faith congregations ask me to come up. And what we're finding is it's the same type of teenager is the one that is taking your life. It's the one that on the outside has it all together, success-driven, good student, captain of their football team, lacrosse team, and that kind of stuff. And so when it happens, it shocks the community because we didn't see it coming. And that's right. The standard DSM-5 diagnostic manual signs to watch out for suicide. We don't put that aside because it's not the same as it was back when I was a teenager in the early 90s, where there was some telltale signs. But that was also before social media. So how do we redefine success? I want to pose 4 or 5 things tonight for us to consider. Again, I don't know it all. I just know from my experience and my research over the last almost 20 years what things I've found and what students have told me. And so this is just a very brief overview of these couple things. But the first thing is considering how do we redefine success. And the big thing is in our relationships. Anybody seen this cycle before? The attachment cycle. Anybody familiar with the attachment cycle? Okay. For those of you that are not familiar with the attachment cycle, this is how societies run, families run, relationships run, but it's really based off of early childhood development. And this idea of, there we go. So this idea that we have a need, everybody has a need. So think about a baby. If a baby has a need, how does the baby communicate the need? Cries, right? That's the only way they communicate the needs, right? They don't pop up and say, well, I'd like a bottle, please. No, they cry. And as a parent or as a caregiver, if we meet that need, then a sense of trust is developed, and then they have a sense of identity, or sense of self that is developed. But here's the big deal with this, right? When the need is communicated, just the simple act of the parent attending to that need is actually meeting the need. So I remember as a dad, when my girls were really young, in diapers. My wife was out, and they're crying. My wife says, they have a cry for everything, and you need to listen to the language of crying. I just hear crying, I'm sorry. But it was the act of me getting up off my chair, off my desk, and going and tending to that need, whether I got it right the first time, that was important. So if it was the diaper was not dirty, but I changed the diaper, I'm still having that need being met. Then it's the, go down to, maybe they're hungry. Well, that didn't work. They just need to be helped. But it's the act of meeting that need that really makes a difference. And this is the big deal right here. Trust develops, and a sense of self is born. But look at this. If this doesn't happen, so the need is being expressed, and there's a communication of this need, and the need goes unmet. Not only does it go unmet, but there's no desire or no action towards meeting that need. A mistrust develops, and there's a fractured self. If you've ever worked with kids that have been neglected or abused, we know that after a time of communication of need and not being met, they stop asking. So when we find in orphanages in communist countries that have fell, these kids are in, some kids we found in like the Czech Republic now or Czechoslovakia back then, that the orphanage would change the diaper and feed them once a day. And these kids were still dying because they had no relational connection, right? And so they'll stop asking. And so here's the reason I bring this up and set the stage is that to redefine success with our kids is to develop this relationship. And you're like, well, no duh. It is that simple, and it's that complicated at the same time. So for kids, for any of us, to really develop a successful relationship, we have to have these three things to create a secure bond. And I want to slow down and talk about this for just a second. When was the last time you were seen? Not stared at, not seen physically. When was the last time you were seen? So you were talking to a friend, let's say, you just had a really bad day, and you were venting, and they actually saw behind what you were saying and spoke to your core need. You're venting about your boss, yelling at you, and your friend said, well, it feels like you were overlooked, and that had to hurt. That's being seen. It's not being, well, how was your day? Fine. Right? So in order to be in relationship with our teenagers, we have to see them, but that takes time. That takes effort. That takes purposefulness. It's not when they get home from school and they throw their backpack down on the table, how was your day? Fine, okay. And they go back up to their room or down in the basement to play video games. It's having that face-to-face, eye-to-eye contact, conversation. It can only be 2-3 minutes long. But that's so important. Do you know what statistics show us how much time the average American spends looking into somebody else's eyes? You want to guess? The average American, this is American, not worldwide, the average American spends 30 seconds a day looking into somebody else's eyes. How do we know if somebody's not doing well? It's through the eyes. It's through the facial features and the expressions. And so this is going to take time, but to be seen. But here's another thing, to be safe. So to be safe means that we're both protected from harm and not terrified by our caregiver. This is highly important. So, protected from harm, right? I mean, we know what that means. But then, not terrified of our caregiver. I don't know about you, but as a dad, sometimes I lose my cool. Right? I yell at my kids. Anybody else yell at their kids sometimes? Okay. I'm just self-disclosure right here. And what that does, my daughters have told me this, what that does is that creates a little bit of fear coming back to talk to dad next time something happens. And I don't want that. But if I lose my cool, I'm creating a disruption in the bond. And there's an unsafety. Not like I'm a scary ogre, but it's like, well, if I go tell dad this, will he react the same way he did last time? That's what I'm talking about safety too. And do we know, and with attachment, here's the beautiful thing about attachment, is that if I lose my cool and yell at my daughters, but I go back within the next 20 minutes, hour, even that same day before they go back to bed, and go, you know what, Dad really blew it. I get down on their level, I look at their eyes, well, they're actually at my level now, but look at their eyes and ask them to forgive me. The attachment bond before the disruption is actually stronger after I apologize. Isn't that awesome? We have the power to enhance that, and so it's even deepening the safety. And also being soothed. So if we're distressed, we want to actually go to our caregiver and walk away feeling better about ourselves. And how many of you know that actually it's better to do that without words than it is with words? We are a culture that likes to talk, and talk excessively. But what we find in research is just being in proximity with somebody when we're upset actually creates safety, security, and the ability to be soothed. And then we create the secure attachment that we hope to do with all of our kids. In interviewing, so I used to work in Denver. I used to work in the gang intervention unit in Denver, and also used to work in the juvenile justice system. And I started seeing patterns over the couple of years. And I started asking my patients this question: what is one thing, or what was one thing, or what is one thing you wish you would have received from your parents that you never got, or your caregivers that you never got? And 9 times out of 10, they would say this. They would say, I wish they would have set boundaries, listened, and just allowed me to vent. We find the number one cause, or one of the number one causes of suicide ideation, this is actually interviewing students that have attempted, is isolation and loneliness. And I've interviewed parents of students that have completed, and they say, well, we're a close family, and I didn't see this coming. And we started, again, we don't want to do the what ifs, because that's not fair to anybody. They started realizing that their child began to isolate themselves. It's not that the family was doing anything wrong, but the child started isolating themselves from social media, isolating themselves with video games, isolating themselves. And so if we're trying to redefine success, we need to look at it through the lens of relationship. But also something I want to throw up there. Oops. Go back. Maybe. Keep on pointing at the screen like the TV's back there. Let's go back there. So this is something I love to look at, is where emotions are displaced in our body. So I'm not going to do a big old biological test right now, but we have neurons that are in our brain, behind our heart, and in our groin region. And that's how the neurons are dispersed. And that's how we feel. It's the connection of neurons and the releasing of hormones. And if we're going to redefine success, not only are we going to do it through relationship, we're going to do it through emotional intelligence. And who knows that emotional intelligence starts at home, right? We can't expect our kids to have emotional intelligence if we don't. I have, so just take a look and kind of take note of what you notice. We look at the concentration of anger or fear, disgust, happiness, sadness. Just go through that and look at that and notice what you recognize or realize with that. One of the things I do all the time when I'm working with families is I'm a little dramatic in my sessions, but when a family comes in to do counseling and there's not an identified patient, like a kid is having an issue, I give them a standing ovation because I tell the parents, the fact that you're in here working on stuff that you know you're deficit in is actually showing your kids that they're worth you working on yourself. And that's a beautiful thing. We think counseling is this, like, if I'm in crisis, I need to go figure out life. No. If you're trying to figure out life, go to counseling. Because it helps you become a better individual, a better parent, a better spouse, a better caregiver. But emotional intelligence, how many of you know what you feel when you're feeling it and how you're feeling it? Not very many of us. It takes effort, right? How many of you can look at your significant other or your child or your boss or a friend and go, that's what they're feeling? Right? It takes time, it takes effort. But emotional intelligence is just like IQ, but it's through the emotional interactiveness between individuals. And so it's not only recognizing what's going on inside of you, but it's recognizing what's going on inside of you when somebody across from you is not doing well. One of the reasons I love being a counselor is I'm an empath. And so when somebody's sitting in my office, I'm also feeling exactly what they're feeling. And if they're not being honest with me, I know it because I'm feeling it in my shoulders or my stomach or my chest. But I'm wondering how many of us are that as well, and we just don't know it. And so it's becoming more emotionally intelligent so that when our kid is sitting across from us and they're bawling their eyes out and they can't put words to why they're crying, we can sit and listen and be there with them and then be empathic and go, I wonder if you're feeling like this because I know that this happened in school today. I wonder if you're feeling like this because I'm feeling like that right now, and right? So it's this idea of bolstering up our emotional intelligence. I'll make sure I get through all this. So this idea of mirror neurons. So about 10 years ago, 24 years ago now, they did a study of monkeys in a lab, and they were watching a monkey eat a banana and a monkey that was watching a monkey eat the banana, and the same neurons fired in both monkeys. They said, I wonder if we studied humans, if that would be the same, and it is. And so what this tells us is that if I come home and I am upset as a dad, right, I had a hard day, for whatever reason I had a hard day, or something happened on the way home in the middle of Colorado Springs traffic, so right, I just got all worked up. And I walk into my house, and because I am almost 6'3", and 240 pounds, my neurons are firing, and I have my girls at home and my wife, and after 20 minutes of being home, we're all in bad moods. And why? Because their neurons are firing the same way mine are, and I'm upset. So the emotional intelligence piece of going, okay, I'm upset, I've had a hard day, let me figure out some mindfulness or some ways of calm me down, so when I get home, I know that I'm not going to transfer my energy onto my family. It's this idea of realizing that we affect others. Nobody thought I was going to bring up quantum physics tonight. Anybody Big Bang Theory fans? Okay, I wish there were more. If you haven't watched it, Big Bang is awesome. But quantum physics is this idea of we're studying the particles and the energy between us. And so at any given time, this goes back with the mirror neurons, is that when I'm having a negative day or a bad day, the energy that I'm emitting, the quantum particles that I'm emitting are harsh, are not good. And they're going off and they're bouncing off those that are around me. And so I can affect those around me in a positive or negative way. And so if I realize that, my thoughts and my feelings lead to my actions, I can change that as I become more aware of my own emotional intelligence. And this idea of creating space. You're like, well, I have teenagers, they don't talk to me. Well, it's typical teenagers. But do you create space for them to talk to you? Do you create space for them to, if they come home and they need their space because they've had a hard day at school, but before they go to bed, your door's open in your room and they can come sit down and talk whenever they want to? Like, what does that space look like? Because they're not going to just come seek you out all the time. So how do you seek them out or create space for them to come talk? Are you following? Okay. Next, I'll go through this real quick. But is our mindset. So not only do we need to redefine relationships and our emotional intelligence, but we need to look at our mindset. So this idea of mindset is a self-perception or self-theory that people hold about themselves. And for the most part, the United States has a fixed mindset. So my intelligence and my talent that I'm born with is all that I get. So I'm going to do my best to track that and to spend time documenting it. It's a fixed trait, it does not change. It's not true. Growth mindset is what I want you to think about. A growth mindset is where people believe that their most basic abilities can be developed through dedication, hard work, excuse me, and their brains and talents are just the starting place. Think about it for a minute. So what this looks like is, I'm not good at math. Is that a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? Fixed. And growth mindset is, math is hard, but I'm going to enjoy trying. Right? It's this idea that, this might be my most difficult subject, but I'm going to enjoy the process of learning. And this goes back to how we look at success. And so if we are driving our kids through these, the talents and the intelligence pieces, which are all good, that becomes our major point, we're pushing into this fixed mindset. And so we find that when we get to college, the fixed mindset is producing the anxiety and the depression. So one thing I did put up there is that they studied about 46% of college students feel helpless and hopeless, because they get to college with one definition of success, and then I get to college and they have no idea what they want to do with their lives, because it doesn't look the same as it did in high school. But if we can teach our kids, even if we can't change the system, a growth mindset, then it becomes about learning and discovering and adventure. And so when they have a failure, a loss, or a disappointment, it's not the end of the world. It's just a part of the journey. So just idea, last piece, and then we'll go to practical tips. But active parenting, anybody heard that term before? Active parenting is this idea that we take an active role in our kids' lives. And I hate to break it to you, but your kids are not meant to be your best friends. They're meant to be your kids, and it's your job to grow them and develop them into functioning, kind adults. And so it takes work, but it's highly beneficial. So what kind of boundaries do you have? I actually, when I work with families, they say, well, what should our rules be? I'm like, you should probably only have 3 rules in your house. And one of them should be respect. And then you figure out the other 2. But boundaries, do they know where their boundaries are? Do they know that, we know that about every 4 to 6 years, kids will start pushing the boundaries to see if they're still there. And so you have the terrible 2s, and then they get into 5-year-old, and then they get to preteen, and then they get to teenager. But they're pushing the boundaries to see if they're still there. So what are your boundaries? What are your thoughts on social media? Do you know what your kids are doing on social media? Another question. But consistency. So if you have rules, if you have 3 rules and you have boundaries, do you stay consistent with that? Relationship, again, stating the obvious, but how much time do you spend with your kids? How much time do you spend with your kids? How much time do you open up for conversation? Not you talking at them, you talking with them. And then discipline. The root word of discipline is disciple, which means to teach. I don't believe in punishment. Punishment is punitive. Discipline is together. Discipline is teaching life skills and those kinds of things. But the expert on your team is not you. The expert on your team is your team. So get to know them. So let's do some practical tools, and then we'll jump up for about 8 minutes. We'll jump up and we'll have the panel come up. But some practical tools. First tool, spend daily quality time with your teenager. I have this thing at my office when I work with families, and they have the identified patient is the teenager because the teenager's acting up, which is never really the person that's the identified patient. It's the one that gets them to come to counseling. I say, so how often do you spend time with your kid? And they say, well, on weekends. How much time on weekends? Well, they're kind of downstairs in the basement, and I'm like, okay, we redefine this here. So I said, okay, I'll do this for you. If you spend 15 minutes with your kid on their level doing what they want each day for the next 3 weeks and their behavior doesn't change, I'll give you your money back, basically. And like, oh, mom and dad, okay, well, I'll take you on the challenge. And they do it, and the behavior goes away. Why? Because the kid desires intimate relational time on their level doing what they like. Explore their dreams and desires for the future. What do you want to be when you grow up does not have to go away when you hit 5 years old. Ask them that at 10 and 12 and 13 and 14 and 15, especially as they get closer to the college years. What are their dreams and desires for the future? Maybe college is not even it. Maybe it's a trade school, maybe it's culinary institute, maybe it's art institute, maybe it's traveling for a little while. I don't know. Understand what success looks like for them. Remember that they're not your mini-me's, and you don't need to be living vicariously through them. My dad did that. That's what kind of pushed me towards some of my struggles. And after we went and got counseling, he really saw what was going on. Understand what success looks like for them. Let them know you're proud of them, and only because, for the only reason is because they're them. When was the last time you told your kid that you were proud of them for being who they are, not for a success or an achievement? And you might be saying, wait, I don't push my kid at all, but my kid's driven. Well, why is your kid driven? Well, when do you tell them that you're proud of them? They start having that story playing, and if I do something, my mom and dad are going to notice and then take, and pay attention and tell me that I'm proud. I tell my girls on a daily basis why I'm proud of them, what character traits I see in them that I'm honored to be their dad about. So consider that. Also, limit social media time. Research, you're going to laugh at this, But research shows that 60 to 90 minutes is all the brain can handle of screen time and social media on a daily basis. But parents, this includes you too. Sometimes we're the own worst culprits, aren't we? So when you ask your kid to put their phone away, put your phone away. And come up with family rules about that. But research is showing now that any more than this, I think the current stat for the United States is 9.5 hours our teenagers are on their phones a day. It's not a week, it's a day. And it's actually atrophying, research is showing that it's atrophying the emotional intelligence part of the brain. So they cannot, or have a hard time recognizing the emotional intelligence piece we just talked about. Eat dinner together 3 times a week. Why? Because you can look into their eyes and ask them questions and hear about their day, and they can talk with you, and you can see, oh, maybe something's not right with Joey. He said he was fine, but his eyes look really sad. Well, I'm going to follow back up with that. Learn to actively listen, understand, and empathize. When was the last time you asked them questions and just let them talk? When was the last time you asked them questions to get a deeper understanding of where they're at and not respond? Remember, they're not a mini you, and so they might not have the same opinions or ideals as you, but they're a part of you, and so you want to know them in a way that they can express themselves. And I repeat myself, but to make a point. Recognize when they're not doing well and make yourself available to listen. And here's the thing. I know what it's like to be a parent and have a kid struggle. My daughter struggles with anxiety. And at first it took it personally. I'm not a good dad. What did I do wrong? It's not about me. And so a lot of times we don't reach out for help, whether that's to a teacher, a school counselor, a clergy member, a counselor, a neighbor, a mentor, a grandparent, whatever that might be, because we're ashamed. You guys remember, it's not about you. It's about your kids. And so recognize when they might need help. I always tell parents, kind of figure out when you're above your pay grade. Right? And if there's some severe anxiety, it's okay to go find some help. If it's depression, it's okay to go find some help. If you find a letter or a picture that's drawn or something that's disturbing, or you find drug paraphernalia or something, it's okay to ask for help. But one of the last things I want you to hear from me before we transition over to the panel is that research just came out with a study, I think it was out of Harvard, that said that 45.9% of teenagers stated that their parents are still one of the most important voices in their life. We feel like that we abdicate our role as they become teenagers to the world and society and that kind of stuff. But research is showing that's not true. 45.9% of teenagers still say parents have the most important role in their lives. And what that means, guys, is that your opinion about sex, about drugs, about mental health, about life choices, about whatever you fill in the blank, they matter. And so don't be afraid to have those conversations with your kids. And they might have an opinion back, and that's fine. But let me tell you, they're listening and they're watching. And so just to recap, what does your relationship at home look like with your kiddos? How is your own emotional intelligence as a parent, as a caregiver? And how is that translating over to your kids? What is your mindset? Maybe you have a fixed mindset. You need to work on that growth mindset idea. And how often are you availing yourself to allowing your kids to come and be a part of your conversation? I know this is quick. There's a lot of information in this, and you probably have a lot of questions. And so we want to transition over now to the panel. And I will hang out afterwards too. If you have questions, I'll hang out at the table in the back. I've got a couple of my counselors here that would love to talk with you as well. So thank you for allowing me to take this time today.
Hopefully this will work. Karen Broff, Superintendent of Schools for Lewis Palmer School District. And the reason why I care about this particular topic and why I was more than willing to be a part of this when Bridget asked me to be. We have a crisis that's untended right now in our country, and it is in regard to the mental health of our students. And I care greatly about making sure that we really start paying attention to what we can do to support our kids. It's a very difficult time, many distractions, many things that are pulling our kids away from their center of who they are. So that's why I'm here.
So my name is Ryan Eels. I'm a junior at Palmer Ridge High School, and I wanted to be a part of this tonight and be here to answer any questions that you all may have, because I know that I think all of us in our own way have been affected by friends or family or even ourselves with mental illness. I know I've had family members and close friends, so I just wanted to be a part of the hopeful solution.
Hi, I'm Gwen Simbeck. I am one of the school counselors at Palmer Ridge High School. I'm also a parent. I have 3 daughters in the Discovery Canyon system, so I've experienced a lot of the tragedies as a parent and walking through with my own students, my own kids, how to think through and how to respond. And just to be a mental health professional in the educational world, there's just, we see every day the pressures that our students are facing. So I do want to be part of the solution, and that begins with me as a parent and with me coming here, showing up, and trying to offer some help and hope too.
I'm Erica Nash. I'm a counselor here at Lewis Palmer High School. And I wanted to be here tonight because us as counselors, we see on a daily basis the way that the topics we're talking about tonight affect our young people. And the experience that we have, I think, can help. And it takes a village for everybody to do right by these kids. It's the community, it's the families at home, it's all of that. And the things that are happening need to be brought up and talked about. It needs to come out in the open. And that can be a difficult thing because it's a shift from kind of the way it's been historically. It's a shift from the way that we all grew up. But our kids need to see that there's no shame in talking about these things. And we're the role models for that. If we're ashamed to talk about these things, the kids are going to be less likely to come out for help. So it needs to be brought up and come out in the open, and it's just part of what these kids are dealing with, so let's help them.
Hi, my name is Mark Haug. I'm a parent. My youngest daughter happens to be running sound for us tonight. She's a senior here at Lewis Palmer. Our oldest daughter is a suicide survivor. Was hospitalized 3 times, twice for a significant threat that she was deemed a risk to herself, but the 3rd time was after a serious attempt. And so we have lived in this seat personally. I'm also a suicide survivor personally. I'm also a pastor. I did 32 years serving with teenagers and pastoral counseling. I had a chance to serve on the countywide task force for suicide prevention. And it's just a privilege to be here. I've also been a part of seeing Sources of Strength show up here at Lewis Palmer High School, and it's been a cool privilege as well.
Hi, I'm Tom Walker. I'm the chairman of the board of a program called Value Up. I'm here because Mike Donahue couldn't be. He's speaking today down at Parkland, down in Florida, where the shootings took place. And so he asked me to come. I've been with him for over 25 years, and written a lot of our curriculum with him. So we're just passionate about helping young people understand that their value is both intrinsic and immeasurable. No matter what they've done, no matter their circumstances, no matter anything that happens, their value cannot be altered or changed in any way. And that's the singular mission that we have. And so I'm here to speak that out.
Okay, I think we're ready to get started with some of the questions that the audience has submitted. And I'm going to read these exactly as they're written. And so if you need clarification, we'll do our best to try to find out who might have submitted the question. So the first question is, what are the main causes of bad mental health?
I don't think that's a hard question. I don't think we can pinpoint it. I don't want to say things tonight if other mental health professionals up here can answer that as well. But I think it's a multifaceted perspective. I mean, it goes anywhere from genetics to how we eat, to how we sleep, to our social media, the screen time that we have, to pressure, to stress. There's a lot of different mitigating factors when it comes to mental health struggles. But I would say that one of the number one things that we see is that family systems, the genetic pass down. If a parent is struggling with depression, a lot of times the child will as well, but it's not a across the board carte blanche thing. So I don't want to be dismissive of that question, but I think we have to be careful that we don't want to look for certain things to lay blame on specific mental health issues.
I can tell with our daughter's story, it was poor diagnosis or misdiagnosis. Also, inadequate or lack of efficiency of medication, and the watch care of that. So those are the things.
I'll say one thing we always say, is it biological or is it belief? Because if it's biological, that's not really something that I'm qualified to really help with. But if it's belief-based, that's something that we can really begin to look at and talk about. So trying to really identify which of those it is, so we can tackle. And I understand that the biological often leads to the belief, but many times at home you can ask yourself, is this something that I need to get the doctor involved in, or is this something that we can really talk through and try to find out what the root belief is?
I can add to that a little bit. Sometimes it has to do with the way a young person perceives their situation and thinks about their situation in response to it. I talk to parents sometimes when, this comes up. Your son or daughter has talked about feeling like they're depressed. And the parents are like, but everything's fine. They have everything they need. Everything is good. We have everything. And there's more to it than that. It sometimes just something is not processing right in the brain, and they need help with the way they think about things. And that's something that therapy can do, so that can be a piece of it too.
I find myself asking the students that I work with, how are you sleeping? Like that's one of the first questions we talk about. When DCC had their contagion and brought in some experts from the national suicide, some experts, they spoke a lot about giving parents permission to be parents, about protecting their sleep and protecting their well-being. So that is one place that I really dig into when I'm talking with students, is their sleep, because that's one role that we can do something concretely about.
Well, I'm obviously not as much of a mental health expert for this, but as far as it goes for kids my age, a big issue that we have, especially in this district, is just the desire to be best at everything. And with that, the stress and the workload that comes along with it, taking as many AP classes as we can, being involved in everything that we can, and just trying to handle that. And I think we don't always handle it the best, so we don't know how to handle that. So I think mismanaging our time and stress definitely adds to the issue.
Okay, here's the next question. How can my child help other students who tell her that they do not feel loved? How can my child help other students who tell her they do not feel loved?
Well, again, on this, I think that as youth, we often have kids come to us because it's a lot easier to share how we feel with each other. We feel we can relate better. There's been a lot of change in how we've grown up between myself and how my parents grew up with social media. So when kids come to me or my friends and say that, I think it's important that we just stress that we can't necessarily speak to how they're loved by other people, but we can stress the importance that they have in our life, and that while we might not always really remind them of that, that they truly do mean a lot to us, and just working hard every day to tell everyone that we see that we love them. And because you never know what those 3 words could mean to someone, because that could be the only time that they hear it that day or that week.
There's a lot to be said for helping kids find connections with other people, whether that's peer groups, inviting them to go do something with a group of friends, inviting them to a game or to go to a club after school or something like that. But something that we talk about a lot is trying to make sure that every student has at least one trusted adult that they can go to. It's a huge protective factor against suicide, mental health issues, all kinds of different behavior things too. So I talk to kids sometimes about how if you have a friend who's struggling, and especially if you're really worried about them and starting to worry about their safety, you need to tell somebody, tell an adult. And I've even heard a student tell her friend, I can't help you with this, but the grown-ups can. They're the ones who can kind of help get resources put into place if that's what needs to happen. And so that's a good avenue too, because if they're getting connected with adults, then we're the ones who can kind of see a little bit what's going on and know what to do with it and know what that student might need kind of in the big picture.
I think it's important to tell them to tell the right adult, because a lot of times as parents, you may not know what to do. So if they tell you, then you get to the right adult, because knowing how to get someone help when they're stressed is not something that everyone has that information or knows what to do. So if they tell a teacher, if they tell a counselor, if they tell a minister, somebody that knows, okay, these are the steps that we can take to get that person help is really important. And if they tell you, then you get to somebody that can do that. I think is really, really critical, and to always take those things seriously.
I would say to the peer-to-peer connection, one, don't go it alone. Too often, a student out of empathy will latch onto another student and say, I'll be your savior, and that they just can't carry that. It truly does take a community of folks to love someone well. I'd also say it's got to be sincere and it's got to be consistent. The student up here on the panel will tell you, they can smell a fake a mile away. And if it's not sincere and it's not consistent, then actually maybe doing more damage than not by kind of faking it with someone you care about.
So there was another question here that was very similar to that one. So in the interest of getting to some other questions, I'll skip to the third one on this card. How do I get a student to excel when they think that just getting the grade will do?
Going to sound kind of counterintuitive, but give them something that they can't excel at. Give them a task that that they're going to fail at. Because when we learn failure, we learn how to bounce back. We learn grit. We learn resiliency. We learn that the world does not revolve around how well I can do something. And if we can do that and give them opportunity to fail within boundaries of our own home, and that we're there and providing steps to grow in that, I think it helps shift the mindset from the fixed, like get the grade, to the growth. Let's make this an adventure and let's learn along the journey. But a lot of times I see in my office that, or I've interviewed kids that have attempted, and it's failure, loss, and disappointment are a lot of things that feel like the world's going to end. And we know, right, as adults that your boyfriend or your girlfriend breaks up with you, you get a bad grade on a test or something like that, the world's not going to come to an end, but to them it feels like it. And so we need to value that and to understand where they're coming from, and to give them a chance to bounce back through grit and resiliency. And so I think that's, to repeat it, to give them a chance to fail a little bit at home, and then help them walk with them through it.
I think it's a great opportunity to be curious about your student. And I think that when you adopt that attitude of, that's really interesting, I wonder what's beneath that, then it can really open up discussion. You can be in the role of student, learning who your kid is. Maybe that particular grade or that goal isn't really what they're about. Maybe they don't believe they can make it. There's so many different reasons why they're doing what they're doing. So just adopting the attitude of curiosity can go a long way in helping them become more aware. And then you are not confronting, you are collaborating with them.
And sometimes it's about having those conversations and helping them discover what are they really interested in. We have about 1 million different opportunities and ways that students can go through high school to help them end up somewhere when they're done. So sometimes it's having a conversation with your student's school counselor, like sending them in. Like there's so many things, so many different directions that we can help them go. That if they're not applying themselves to what they're currently doing, then maybe we need to explore some other things and see what else is out there that might kind of energize them a little bit more.
How can the community, non-parents, help to support our youth?
I think it's figuring out where to volunteer. You know, are you going to volunteer at the school here, or volunteer at the YMCA, or become a mentor? You know, the Boys and Girls Club, you know, for downtown types things. But also, I think finding ways to get involved from an advocacy level. You know, Todd, I know Mike, but you know, getting involved with Value Up, getting involved with the local church, getting involved with the Suicide Prevention Task Force in Colorado Springs, El Paso County Health. I mean, there's so many different ways that we can get involved. That doesn't mean we have to have a teenager or a kid, you know. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities. And so if you want specific ones, you know, come talk to my team or myself afterwards, and we can get you connected with the specifics.
In my years of working with teenagers in the church world, one of the things that was so great is that we could say the same thing parents are saying without having the responsibility of discipline. We could be a different ear, a different person to care. I'd also say, how can the community engage? Just notice them. Don't look at them as an annoyance or something that's, oh, here comes trouble, but no, actually here comes an opportunity of someone I could get to know, and then listen. Actually listen to their stories. Pause and pay attention, make that eye contact that Mark was talking about. But the community can do so much. Actually, the community is invaluable in the process of valuing the teenagers in our world today. I think too often we're afraid of our own teenage experience. We don't want to go back there again. Well, get over yourself and engage.
Thank you. So how does stress have an effect on a student's mental health? How does stress have an effect on a student's mental health?
I mean, it can be definitely a contributing factor to mental health difficulties, because the more stressed you feel, Dr. Mayfield talked about the connection and what stress actually does to the brain physically, and that can open the door for all sorts of things. And stress in and of itself can cause anxiety, because a component of stress is being worried about things not turning out well. And when that really kind of spirals out of control, it can turn into anxiety, which can manifest itself in panic attacks, avoiding certain things, you know, not wanting to go to this class because you have a test coming up and you think you're going to bomb it. And sometimes it can spiral to the point where concerns and worries like that are not totally valid, you know, and a kid kind of psychs themselves out so much, and it can turn into an anxiety problem that way. So can lead to depression also, just if you feel like a mountain of burdens on yourself, just all kinds of different things kind of pile up. Sometimes kids are kind of okay until they feel like they, you know, just that one last thing, like all this had happened, I got in a fight with my friend, and now I just can't keep it together anymore. So it can be kind of a cumulative effect that way too. So I'll let these guys talk now.
I think that we say this in Value Up all the time. We teach this across the country. It was taught today in several different places. Don't gauge their stress through your filter. You may run a company and have 12 employees and have people calling you all the time, da, 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 you know how to manage that and all that stuff, and then you hear their stress, you know. Stacy was mad at me, and you belittle that stress, but we've dealt with families, and I remember Mike got a call one time from a mom who lost their child to suicide, and she said, I wish I believed him. I wish I had believed him. And it was stress over, I one time got a phone call from a young man, and he called me and he said, I have a gun in my hand and I just had it in my mouth. And I said, don't move your phone, keep your phone right next to your face, put the gun down and drive to my house right now. When he got there, I thought I was going to hear a dramatic story, and I heard a girl broke up with him and he got a C. And if he communicated that to his parents or to the people that are important to him, and they belittled that, that's what leads to feeling hopeless and not knowing what to do. So do not filter their stress through your filter. You have to believe them when they tell you that this is important to them and it matters.
I also say, just like our choice of diet, the easiest access food is not always the best. And for a student, sometimes the easiest coping mechanism is the least healthy. And you engage in that coping mechanism over and over again, it becomes such an effect that the healthy coping mechanisms atrophy. And so stress has a huge impact on the fact that we begin to lean into unhealthy coping mechanisms, and it just can become a downward spiral from there.
There's a lot of research too, just based on health outcomes, so longevity of stress and how that will manifest in one's health. That's a pretty good impetus for us to nip it in the bud. But the thing I was thinking about is just if you can think through being in a terrifying situation where you're in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, that's basically what you're living every day, all the time. And it's not a healthy place to be. You can't do relationship from that place. You can't self-actualize from that place. You can't really even dream or problem solve or be creative. You can't be your best self when you're in that place. So I think just tapping into that experiential, empathic connection with your kids is really important to understand that, yeah, at their scale, this is a really, really frightening thing.
I think one thing that we can do too is realize that there's good stress and bad stress. And good stress propels us forward, and it's actually a positive thing, but bad stress is this prolonged piece where a part of our brain that releases cortisol, called the HPA axis, actually it's kind of like a slow drip over a rock. If you put a faucet on and just let it drip over time, it's going to wear away the rock, and it's going to do the same thing to our brain and our body. Studies show that our brain actually shrinks through prolonged stress. So think about forethought, insight, thinking through different decisions and that kind of stuff. It's impaired because of that. But the greatest thing you can do, and I love what everybody said so far, but one of the greatest things you can do as well is create what I call a pattern interrupt with your kid. And that's teaching them mindfulness. It's going for a walk with them. It's maybe taking a break and playing video games. It's doing something that gets them, kind of interrupts their stress patterns. And as adults, we need to learn this too. 5 to 15 minutes, is all it takes for us to reset that piece, and so that we can be in a better state of mind and move forward. But teaching our kids that is going to be ideal.
How do we create an optimistic and hopeful attitude?
So some of the latest research coming out concerns gratefulness. And my first impulse to answer would be, we need to model it. We need to do this for ourselves. It's an inside job. And that's the only way we're going to be able to really actively engage our own kids in the process. So that's kind of where my brain went.
If you want to read a great book by Sean Acor, it's called The Happiness Advantage, and he's a professor out of Harvard, and he has the class that is taken by most students are clamoring to take his class. He's been doing it for 12 to 15 years or more. But again, The Happiness Advantage by Sean Acor is amazing as it talks about kind of how to set that tone.
think too, again, modeling that for them. As we talk about looking at success in different ways, and sometimes the things that turn kids pessimistic and they start kind of thinking catastrophically and negatively are things that we can reframe and turn into learning opportunities. And as parents, we can be really cognizant of how we respond when our student fails or doesn't do something the way that we were hoping they would, or doesn't go the way that they were hoping it would. How do we respond to that? How do we put a positive spin on it, if possible? And doing that ourselves too, like letting our kids see us fail and say, you know, that's a bummer. I'm sorry it turned out that way, but here's what I learned, and here's what we can do moving forward, and here's what I'm going to do next time, and here's something that I can take from this. Because that teaches them to take a negative situation and see it in a different way with our support too.
I'd say giving one another the freedom to ask the hard questions. It's not always, hope is like just one step away. Sometimes we have to go backwards before we go forwards. And that's okay, and modeling that. The other two words that first came to my mind were there's got to be sincere and it's got to be small. It's not going to happen right away. But sincerity is really the core. It's, people sit around Thanksgiving dinner, everyone says what they're thankful for, and most people say, you just made that up. It's like, no, I really mean that, you can tell. So that's a huge value for me.
I think the modeling is really important, but I think that if we can be intentional about, especially as parents, about modeling that for our kids. The other day, I was working on something I was writing about showing appreciation for our spouses, and I kind of was like, man, I haven't really done that lately to my wife. So I went out and picked up some flowers, and picked up a card, and this was just like literally less than a week ago, and I told my kids, I said, hey, we're doing something special at dinner tonight. And so she cooked dinner, and we were all sitting there, and I went down and got these flowers and got the cards, set them on the table, and just said, we just wanted to take tonight to tell you how much we appreciate you. So I said some nice things, and she was starting to get a little teary-eyed. My 10-year-old son said obnoxious things, but he was sweet, and she kind of laughed and got a little teary-eyed. And my 15-year-old daughter started talking about, you're the glue that holds us together. You're the reason we're a family. And my wife just broke, right? Well, I just started weeping. I'm talking like sobbing. And what that taught my children is how to appreciate how good, it just increases that worldview of what I'm gonna have a positive attitude. I'm gonna look at the good things in you and all that stuff. And that never would have happened if I hadn't realized that I wasn't doing it. So to kind of model that for them. And so we have to be proactive and intentional about creating those moments.
All right, so how do you convince your kids limits on their phone is a good thing for them? That's an easy one.
I think do an experiment. Because I think one of the things that research shows, and as I've talked with parents, is they actually do kind of a family experiment and go do a phone fast or whatever you want to call it for a couple days, and then come back and explore what changes. And it's interesting, at least the research I've been doing shows that most kids will go, it was nice to get a break from X, Y, and Z. But I want to challenge that question a little bit too, because you don't need to convince your kids. I think it's, if you're the parent, you bought the phone and you're paying for the service, what do you guys agree upon as a family? And they might not get like a fourth of a vote and you get, a full vote or whatever, but come up with something that you're going to model as well and you're going to do at home. But they don't know what they don't know. And that's a big thing with social media, is you don't know what you don't know until it's dangerous, whether it be, the cyber stalking or, bullying and abuse that happens on social media, but also what it does to our emotional intelligence and our brain. So take that break, do an experiment and take a break, and then create some family rules. Don't take it away. Teach them how to use it well. Like I have parents that take their phones away. I'm like, does that really work? No, it's just they know that if they do this, they'll get their phone taken away and they can weather the storm for a little bit. But do it in relationship and learn to teach them how to use it responsibly. it's not going to go away, guys. Like social media and our phones are just going to continually to get more a part of our lives. And so how do we teach them to be responsible in it and not consume their lives?
So there's a fantastic newsletter offered by Screenagers, and it has great information from the parent point of view. The lady that puts it together is an MD, but she has teenagers, so she references in one of her latest ones. So I subscribe to it as a parent, and I learn stuff that I can use at school and at home, and it's great. Double dip a little bit there. But she also mentions how to talk to your kids. And there's a concept called motivational interviewing where you really, again, you're getting curious and you're asking, well, what are the benefits? And then what are the disadvantages? What are you seeing? Because then they're going to answer. They're going to answer and usually come up with the things that you would want to tell them straightforwardly. But if you can elicit it in a conversation, then it's a lot more impactful and they have a lot more ownership. And they own it a little bit more in their choices going forward. So Screenagers and motivational interviewing is what I would tap into.
I can tell you from a practical experience, in the church world, we would do a retreat annually called Unplugged. And the first year we did it, students knew that they were signing up, and they turned their phones in at the beginning of the weekend, and they got it back at the end. The next years that we did it, they were tripping over each other to turn in their phones. It was like, thank you for giving me the chance just to be quiet. A chance to just pay attention to my peers. And it was just simply giving them the permission that you can regulate this, you can turn it off. You have the freedom to do so, and giving them that power. That is such a beautiful thing to take place. So, thank you very much.
If you had a magic wand, how would you use the wand to address current social and emotional climate in our society?
Well, this is kind of beating our drum, but I would wave that magic wand and everybody would understand just how valuable and wonderful they are. And that's not based upon anything they can do, anything they've done. I would wave that wand over prisons. I would wave that wand over high schools. I would wave that wand everywhere. Each person would understand that their intrinsic value that has nothing to do with what they've done, what they do, or what they might do.
So I would use that wand to kind of show kids that what you see on social media is not always reality. So on social media, we only post our highs. We only post the best parts of our lives. And so when you're struggling and you're going through a rough patch, you open up Instagram, Snapchat, whatever, and all you see is kids living great experiences, going on trips with their happy families, smiles. And so the issue that I think we don't understand with social media all the time is that just because someone looks happy on social media doesn't mean that they also struggle or are also facing a lot of challenges. So I would use my magic wand to kind of show kids that just because you see something on social media doesn't mean that you're alone in the struggle.
Tricky little thing here, I have to keep fixing the cord. How can I, as a student, approach adults so I can talk to them about my feelings?
I think it's at times we overcomplicate this, and it's just find, as we've all been talking about, find the right adult, a safe adult, and just go, hey, do you got a minute to talk? And if they're a right adult and a safe adult and they're paying attention, they're going to be like, yeah, let's just sit and have a conversation. What's going on? I think a lot of times we, at least I maybe speak from experience, I tried to find an adult to talk to, and I always found the wrong adult. It was the adult that was too busy, or it was an adult that didn't know me very well. And so I think it's being vulnerable enough to go, okay, I can go to that person because they really know me, and it's going to be hard because I'm going to be vulnerable, but they're the best person for me. So it's figuring that out and taking that risk to be vulnerable, because you'll probably find out that the adult will reciprocate that vulnerability.
What has changed the most between Generation X or Y to to our children, currently Generation Z, that has led to the increase of anxiety, depression, and sometimes depression?
Well, this is something that my parents always say to me, and it's the face-to-face interaction, which I think Dr. Mayfield also touched on, is my generation doesn't have that face-to-face interaction, and that is really what satisfies, I think, a lot of our emotions. It's just being able to interact with other people, and when we're on social media, we don't see how our comments really affect people. So growing up, I know my parents, if they wanted to say how they felt to someone, they had to do it face to face, and they saw their reaction. And I think that made a lot of the bullying and harsh comments different, because you would say it and you would see it, and I think seeing how someone reacts has a heavier toll than when you just leave it on an Instagram post, because you have no idea how that actually hits them. So I would say the change of actual human contact would be one of the biggest changes that I've seen between me and my parents.
We are the most connected and yet most disconnected society in history. And it's because we have everything at our fingertips. Remember, I was just reminiscing with, I pulled out my old DOS computer yesterday because I kept it for some stupid reason. And my daughter was like, "What is that?" And I'm like, "This is what I used to play games on, back in the mid-90s. And it didn't have even 1/4 of the connected, this is our phones. And so it's I agree 100%. It's learning to be connected in a way that doesn't have to do with this. But we don't know. This is so new. The iPhone came out how many years ago? 2004, right? And so we don't know what it's doing to this generation long term. And so if we're to do a longitudinal study and follow the iGen and see what happens, down the road, we'll find out what happens to stress levels. What we're finding, though, is that for the first time in history, it came out in 2015, that that generations are dying 15 to 25 years younger than they had in past generations, and a large in part due to how we eat, how we sleep, our technology, and the rise of, not really the rise, but the prevalence of mental health struggles. And so how do we fight that is the big conversation that we have going forward.
That's a book that everybody should read. It's actually called iGen. And a lot of it talks about how, and he's got data, she has all kinds of data to show that, the moment the iPhone came on the scene, all kinds of other just behaviors either started increasing or decreasing. Things like how often do teenagers go hang out with their friends? How many teenagers are getting their driver's license is actually on a pretty steep decline right now. They're not motivated to do it because they don't really need to be able to talk and hang out with their friends. But losing that face-to-face communication is so huge, just because of what happens physiologically when you're eye-to-eye with somebody versus on a screen. Because people say things when they're behind a screen that they've never seen in somebody's face. And the end result of some of that is a lot of the mental health difficulties that we're seeing.
I just want to, this is maybe a different tack, because I know we're talking about mental health and struggles and stuff, but I just want to say today's generation is far more enlightened than our generations were. They're far more, less racist, more tolerant, more willing to resolve and talk issues through. They're much more self-aware from my perspective, and just working with them. I think they just have this, they're so much more educated on these issues. The fact that this is happening didn't happen, when we were kids. And so I think that we should applaud them in so many ways for having a social consciousness. I'm a Gen Xer, we didn't have a social consciousness, we just hated our parents. And so I think we should applaud that in so many ways, because they really, really are progressive. Now, I do think there's an increase in anxiety and depression, and those are the things that we obviously are and should focus on. But I think we should also applaud them for what an amazing generation that is being raised up.
As the parent on here, if you haven't already seen the interview with Simon Sinek, he'll tell you our parenting has not helped. Everyone gets an award, all that kind of stuff. But serious, if you haven't seen the interview with the millennial, you must watch that. I think we're responsible for some of this. I'd also say that talking with a buddy of mine who's been a professor at the university now for 25 years, just with him a couple weeks ago, I said, what have you seen as a difference? And he said, the helicopter parenting has prevented my students from having to cope with disappointment. And I mean that graciously because I'm up here, but it's definitely something we have to take into consideration.
And I think this is going to be our last question. How do we help our kids choose the healthy and maybe harder coping mechanism over the easy coping mechanism?
In my experience, I found that sometimes that's something they need outside help with, just to put it bluntly, because unhealthy coping mechanisms, cutting, using substances, like those kinds of things, actually rewire the brain. So where like the stronger those pathways get created, the easier it is for them to use those pathways, and the harder it becomes to try to pick a different pathway. So sometimes that's something that kids need outside therapy for. And reinforcing it at home is also great. One of my favorite things in the world is when I talk to a kid about things like that, and I say, who are your support people that you talk to? Who do you talk to about this stuff? And when they say my parents, I'm like, oh, thank you. It's amazing, just when I hear that kids have that kind of open and honest relationship with their parents where they can talk about where they're at in terms of mental health. They can talk about if they've cut again and they're trying not to. And so the parents can kind of realize where they're at and see where maybe they can step in to help them with some of those healthier coping mechanisms. And sometimes it's about being intentional with your time with them too, because that is a healthy coping mechanism, is time together and doing things that they'll enjoy.
I'd say the story with our oldest daughter, going through DBT was incredibly helpful. It gave us as a family language to use, particularly flawed thinking or thinking errors, and getting a grasp of those, like all or nothing thinking. Either I'm a complete success or I'm an utter failure, but I can never bear be anywhere in the middle. That's just one example of about 13 different thinking errors. But I think that also helped us in processing new and effective mechanisms.
What's DBT?
I want to let the doctor answer that because I can never pronounce it right.
Dialectical behavioral therapy. Dialectical behavioral therapy, and there's a lot of great places in town that provide that. I like what's been said. I think it's the modeling, it's the relationship piece, it's the realizing that maybe you need help and being okay with that is a big deal. The above your pay grade type of thing, and getting somebody that can. So how many times did you hear as a kid that your mom and dad said one thing and then you heard it from a friend's parent and you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And your parents like, I've been telling you that forever. So it's having more voices speaking into your kids' lives. That's why I love, the schools here, Lewis Palmer and Palmer Ridge and the communities that are around here, because you have good people speaking into your kids' lives. And so if you can really bolster that up and find people that can help. But there's nothing wrong with going to see a counselor either. Nothing wrong with going to your clergy and asking for help. There's nothing wrong with any of that stuff. It's just, who are you going to bring alongside you on your journey to be the best version of yourself?
Okay, I'm going to ask two things of you. Number one, that you take some time to fill out the feedback form and share it off. If you can do that nicely and neatly. If you use it as a note catcher, just leave the whole sheet. So please take a few minutes to do that. There's a box on your way out the door to slip that in there. The second thing is to please help me in thanking the panel, thanking Ms. Groff, thanking my sources, runners. A huge round of applause